Margaret Bergman was packing the last of the children's clothes when Harold walked through the door. 3 suitcases lay open on the bed, their contents neatly folded with the precision of a woman who'd made this decision over weeks, not hours. 12 years of marriage fitting into luggage, a wedding dress wrapped in tissue paper, baby shoes from 3 children. The everyday evidence of a life being dismantled one piece at a time. She didn't even look up when she heard his footsteps. "You're really going to do this?" Harold asked, voice quiet in that careful way he'd learned over 12 years of marriage, the tone a man uses when he knows the answer but can't quite accept it. "I warned you," Margaret replied, folding their daughter's Sunday dress with trembling hands, pressing the fabric smooth with deliberate strokes. "I warned you 6 months ago that I wouldn't live inside a metal tube like some farm animal. I warned you the children wouldn't grow up being laughed at in school, being pointed at on the street, being the town joke. You chose this thing over your family." Her voice didn't rise. That was somehow worse. The anger would have been easier. This was resignation, the sound of hope dying quietly. Outside, January 1949 covered Shelby, Montana, in clean snow that sparkled under weak winter sun. The prairie stretched white and endless in every direction. And gleaming in that winter light, as incongruous as a spaceship landed on the prairie, as absurd as a giant can of beans dropped from the sky, stood the Quonset hut that would destroy their marriage. 20 feet wide, 48 feet long, a perfect half-cylinder of corrugated steel that caught the sun and threw it back in blinding flashes. The thing Harold Bergman had chosen over his family's dignity. But in 5 days, that corrugated steel tube would save 23 lives. Margaret would help bring a new life into the world, inside its metal walls. And the carpenter who couldn't build his family a proper home would prove that sometimes the strongest structures are the ones nobody believes in. Sometimes survival looks ridiculous until the moment it becomes essential. This is the story of that moment. 10 months earlier, March 1948, Harold Bergman hadn't planned on living in a Quonset hut. Nobody plans these things. Nobody wakes up and decides to become the town laughingstock. These things happen through small decisions that seem reasonable at the time, dominoes falling in a line you didn't know you'd set up. He was a carpenter, and a damn good one. At 34, he'd built half the homes in Shelby with his own hands. Every house on Maple Street bore his craftsmanship. His work was solid as the bedrock beneath Montana soil, his joints perfect as geometry, his reputation impeccable as church attendance. Men shook his hand when they paid him. Women recommended him to neighbors. He'd built the life he wanted, one board at a time. Except for one thing. He still rented. After 12 years of marriage, 3 children, and building homes for half the town, Harold Bergman didn't own his own house. They lived in a rented 2-bedroom on the edge of town for $45 a month. Every month, money going to someone else's property. Every month, Margaret's disappointment a little heavier. So when Frank Hutchins offered $300 to build a 60 by 80-foot barn, Harold accepted before Frank finished the sentence. $300 was real money in 1948. $300 would buy enough lumber to finally start the home Margaret dreamed of, the one she talked about on Sunday afternoons, voice soft with longing. 2 stories, a porch that wrapped around the front, hardwood floors that didn't creak, their own place. He worked alone for 6 weeks, starting each day at dawn and ending when he couldn't see his hammer anymore. Foundation leveled with care that bordered on obsession. Master beams of 12 by 12 timber that would outlive everyone alive. A frame that would hold roof snow for 50 winters, 100 if the wood was treated right. Every joint hand-cut, every beam perfectly square, every nail driven true. When he finished, Frank Hutchins walked through that barn like a man inspecting his firstborn child. He examined every joint, his weathered farmer's hands running over the wood, feeling for imperfections that didn't exist. He tested every board, putting his full 200 pounds on planks, jumping to see if they'd flex. He studied the roof supports, counting beams, checking angles. Finally, he stepped back and nodded with the kind of approval that meant more than words. "Best barn in 3 counties, Frank declared, and Harold knew it wasn't flattery. Frank Hutchins didn't flatter. Hell, probably best in the state. But Harold, his expression shifted, uncomfortable now. "I've got a problem. I'm short on cash right now. Harvest was poor last year. Drought took 30% of my yield. I can pay you $150 in cash today, or—" He hesitated, looking embarrassed. "Or I can give you that old Quonset sitting in my north pasture taking up space." Harold knew the Quonset. Everyone in town knew about Frank's Quonset. 20 feet wide by 48 feet long, a gleaming half-cylinder of corrugated steel that Frank had bought from military surplus in 1946 for $25. He'd used it for temporary grain storage, but grain mice got in despite his best efforts, so now it sat empty, an expensive paperweight rusting on his land. "You can resell it for $200, easy," Frank continued, warming to his pitch now. "Maybe more. Those strand steel Quonsets are going for $40 new. Used one in good shape, $200, no question. Or," and here Frank's eyes got that calculating look farmers get, "or you live in it while you build your real house. Structure's solid. Military built these things to last. Save on rent, save the money, build your dream home inside a year." Harold did the math right there in Frank's barn. $150 cash plus selling the Quonset for $200 equals $350. Profit of $50, enough for extra lumber, maybe hardwood for the floors. Or he could live in it. Live in the Quonset. $45 a month rent times 12 months equals $540 saved. Plus the money from this job. Plus the money from regular carpentry work. He could have enough for a real house in 8 months. Maybe 6 if he worked enough jobs. The decision took less than 10 seconds. "I'll take the Quonset," Harold decided. It was the worst decision he'd ever made, and the best. Both at the same time. Margaret didn't take it well. That's putting it mildly, the way you might say a tornado is breezy or a blizzard is chilly. She was making dinner when he told her, standing at the stove in their rented kitchen, stirring a pot of stew that had been bubbling for 2 hours. He remembers that detail because he's replayed this moment 1,000 times. The smell of beef and potatoes, the sound of the spoon against cast iron, the way she went completely still when he said the word Quonset. "You want me," Margaret had said, voice rising an octave, spoon frozen mid-stir, "and your 3 children to live inside a metal tube like stored grain, like wheat." She turned to face him fully now, and Harold saw something in her eyes he'd never seen in 12 years of marriage. Not anger, betrayal. "It's temporary," Harold insisted, the words tumbling out too fast. "A year, maybe less. We save all the rent money, every penny of it. That's $45 a month, and then I build you the house you've always wanted. I swear it, Margaret. Hardwood floors, 2 stories, a porch that wraps around the front just like you drew in that notebook." "Temporary," Margaret laughed, and it was a sound with no humor in it, sharp as breaking glass. "Harold Bergman, you listen to me. You're a carpenter. The best carpenter in Shelby, maybe in all of Toole County. Do you have any idea at all, what people will say when they find out you can't even build your own family a proper house, that you're living in military surplus? Nobody needs to know it's temporary. Everyone will know." Her voice cracked now, and Harold saw tears building. "Harold, it's a 20-foot-tall, shiny metal tube in the middle of the prairie. You can see the damn thing from town. What do you think people will assume? That we're modern? That we're clever?" She set down the spoon with a sharp click. "They'll think we're poor. They'll think you failed. They'll think I married a man who can build everyone else a home, but not his own wife. Mar, I can build you a better home than anyone in this town, because we'll save I don't care about saving money. And there it was, the real issue breaking through. I care about our children coming home from school crying because the other kids make farm animal noises at them. I care about holding my head up at church. I care about people respecting my husband. Her hands were shaking now. You're asking me to trade respect for rent money. You're asking me to trade our dignity for $500 a year. Harold opened his mouth, but she wasn't finished. And the worst part, Margaret continued, voice dropping to something quieter and more dangerous, the very worst part is that you already decided. You didn't ask me. You didn't talk to me about it. You just decided that this was happening, and now you're telling me like it's already done. I thought you'd understand the financial sense of it, Harold said weakly. Financial sense? Margaret wiped her eyes with her apron. You know what makes financial sense, Harold? Your wife not being humiliated every Sunday at church, your daughters not being mocked at school, your son not being ashamed to bring friends home. That makes sense. But you can't put that in a ledger book, can you? But Harold had already decided. The Quonset made sense on paper, made sense in his head, and he was a man who trusted numbers more than feelings. And Margaret, after 12 years married to a man as stubborn as Montana bedrock, a man who made decisions and stuck to them with the immovability of mountains, knew when the battle was lost. She turned back to the stove, stirred the stew, didn't speak to him for 3 days, but she didn't leave, not yet. It took a week to dismantle the Quonset from Frank's pasture and reassemble it on Harold's lot 3 miles outside town. The corrugated steel sections were heavy, each 4 by 8 foot panel weighing 80 pounds. Harold hired 2 men at $5 each to help. The structure went up fast, curved steel ribs forming perfect arches, corrugated metal panels bolted to the ribs. In 3 days, the skeleton was complete. 2 more days to install the wooden end walls with a door and windows, and then it was finished. A gleaming silver steel half-cylinder 20 feet wide, 48 feet long, 12 feet high at the center. Total capacity, 960 square feet of interior space. Total cost to Harold, $22 in bolts, sealant, and paint for the wooden end walls. Harold's oldest daughter, Emma, age 10, looked at the Quonset and started crying. It looks like a giant can of beans, she sobbed. Margaret said nothing. She just got in the 1940 Ford and drove to her sister's house. She came back 3 days later, silent, defeated. She began unpacking boxes inside the metal tube with the mechanical movements of someone burying dreams. Harold worked alone, transforming the interior. First, he built an inner wooden wall 6 inches from the curved metal surface, creating an air gap around the entire perimeter. Then he filled that gap with sawdust, an entire truckload of sawdust that Hanson's mill gave him free just to get rid of it. 6 inches of sawdust, plus the air gap, plus the wooden wall. The interior now looked like a normal house. Flat pine walls, an arched ceiling but covered with panels. He installed a large wood-burning stove in the center, a Monarch model that put out 60,000 BTUs per hour. He divided the interior space into a living area, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms in the back using thick canvas curtains as dividers. Functionally, it was a home. Strange, but functional. Socially, it was a disaster. Emma came home from school crying twice a week. Sarah said we live in a barn. Everyone laughed. The middle child, Thomas, 8 years old, stopped inviting friends over. They make pig noises when they walk past our house, he mumbled, embarrassed. The youngest, Clara, 6 years old, asked every night, when are we going to live in a real house, Daddy? Margaret stopped going to church. I can't face those women, she admitted. The pitying questions. How are you adjusting, dear? Like I'm some kind of refugee. Harold took jobs farther and farther from home, anything to avoid the stairs. It was the 3rd Sunday in December when Margaret decided to leave. Pastor Henriksen had given a sermon about providing for your family as a man of God. After the service, he'd pulled Harold aside. Harold, it's not my business, the pastor began. voice low so no one else would hear. "But those children need stability, a proper home. You're a fine carpenter. Surely you can build your family a decent house." "I'm saving up to—" Harold started. "Saving?" The pastor cut him off. "Meanwhile, your daughters are teased at school. Your wife is embarrassed in the community. Harold, there are times when pride becomes sin." Harold didn't respond. He just nodded stiffly and left. When he got home, Margaret was in the bedroom, suitcases open. "It's not just the house," she said without looking at him. "It's that you chose this ridiculous metal thing over your family's respect, over your children's happiness, over our marriage." "Margaret, no." She finally looked at him, eyes dry but voice broken. "I can't do this anymore, Harold. I'm going to my sister's in Great Falls. The children are coming with me. When you decide your family is more important than saving $50 a month in rent, you let me know." Margaret left Monday morning. She took all 3 children, 4 suitcases, and 12 years of shattered hopes. Harold sat alone in the Quonset at the silent kitchen table, listening to the wind whistle against corrugated metal. 2 days later, Wednesday, the radio started broadcasting warnings. Massive low-pressure system moving down from the Canadian Arctic. Severe storms predicted across northern Montana. Blizzard conditions expected beginning Friday, continuing through Tuesday. 5 to 7 days duration. Temperatures 40 to 50 below zero. This is a historic storm. Prepare accordingly. Harold looked around the empty Quonset. He had enough firewood for 10 days, food for 2 weeks. But without his family, what did it matter? Thursday morning, he went into town to buy more supplies. At the hardware store, he found Frank Hutchins and Robert Wheeler, veteran farmers, buying extra kerosene. "It's going to be bad," Frank said, shaking his head. "Worse than 44, maybe." "You prepared?" "Prepared enough," Harold replied. Robert looked at him with a strange expression. "You going to stay out there alone? In the Quonset?" "It's strong," Harold said defensively. "Stronger than it looks." "It's not the strength I'm worried about," Robert muttered. "It's you out there alone for 5 days. If something happens—" Harold didn't answer. On his way out of the store, he ran into John and Esther Morrison with their 3 young children. John was looking nervously at the sky, already turning grey. "Harold," John said hesitantly, I know people haven't been kind about your living situation. But," he glanced at Esther, who nodded encouragingly, "if things get really bad, do you have room out there for families who might need it?" Harold blinked in surprise. "You mean you'd want to stay in the Quonset if necessary?" "I don't want to," John admitted honestly. "But my cabin's got cracks in the walls I couldn't seal, and I heard these metal structures—" He paused. "I heard they're strong, real strong." For the first time in months, Harold felt something other than shame when he thought about the Quonset. "Yeah," he said firmly. "If you need it, there's room." John nodded, relieved. "Hopefully won't come to that, but it's good to know." The storm hit at 4 in the morning Friday. Harold woke not to sound but to feeling, that animal instinct that something massive was moving outside. The wind wasn't hammering yet, not the violent assault it would become, just constant, strong, purposeful, the way an ocean wave builds before breaking. He lit the oil lamp first, then the stove, hands moving through the familiar motions in darkness. Kindling, newspaper, larger pieces. The fire caught and grew, orange light pushing back shadows in the curved metal space. He made coffee in the old percolator, watching the glass knob bubble, and sat listening to the battery-powered radio, the only voice in the darkness. Temperatures currently 22 below zero and falling rapidly. Visibility less than 50 feet and deteriorating. This is not a normal winter storm, folks. The Canadian Arctic is dumping everything it has on us. Full blizzard conditions expected by noon. If you're not prepared now, it's too late. Stay inside. Do not attempt travel. This storm will kill the unprepared. The announcer's voice had an edge Harold had never heard before. Fear. Real fear from a man paid to stay calm. By 10 in the morning, Harold could barely see the fence posts 20 feet from the window. Horizontal snow, not falling but flying. The world outside had turned white, not the clean white of fresh snow, but the blank white of erasure. Wind howling now, not whistling. Howling like the wounded thing it was. Inside the Quonset, the temperature held steady at 62 degrees. Harold checked the thermometer 3 times, certain he was reading it wrong. Outside was plummeting toward -30. Inside was comfortable. The massive monarch stove burned steady in the center, feeding on logs but not struggling, not working hard, just burning constant. The structure was quiet. That was the strangest part. Harold had expected noise, rattling, banging, the sound of metal under assault. But the Quonset was silent, except for the wind flowing over its surface, not against it. No direct pressure, no stress points. The curved shape doing what curves do, redirecting force, letting it slide past. Harold walked the interior perimeter, checking every join, every seal, his carpenter's hands running over his carpenter's work. No drafts, no cold infiltration creeping through cracks. The double wall with 6 inches of sawdust was working exactly as he'd calculated. Wood and air and sawdust creating an insulation barrier that trapped heat like a thermos traps coffee. At noon, the temperature outside hit -35. Inside, it held at 60 degrees. At 3 in the afternoon, -38. Inside, 60 degrees. Harold sat at his table and did something he hadn't done in years. He prayed. Not for himself. For Margaret and the children, safe in Great Falls, but thinking he was alone. For the families in town whose houses were built with windows facing the wind, whose foundations weren't as solid, whose walls had gaps. Harold woke to pounding on the door. It was 6 in the morning Saturday. Outside temperature, -41 degrees, wind at 60 miles per hour. He opened the door and snow blasted inside. Frank Hutchins stood there, covered in ice, eyes wild. "Harold, my barn roof is giving way. 2 beams cracked. I need to get the animals out before it collapses. Get in!" Harold pulled Frank inside, slammed the door against the wind. Frank stood there shaking, looking around the warm interior of the Quonset. "My God," he whispered, "it's warm in here." 60 degrees, Harold confirmed. "How cold is your house?" 38 last time I checked. Burning through wood too fast. And the barn." Frank closed his eyes. "The barn you built is holding. It's my house that's failing." 2 hours later, Frank came back with 6 sheep, pushing them through snowdrifts. Harold helped make a temporary pen in the back of the Quonset. The sheep settled immediately in the warmth. "You can stay too," Harold offered. Frank looked at him for a long moment. "I mocked you. We all did." "I know. And now you're offering me shelter." Harold shrugged. Storm doesn't care about pride. Frank stayed. They woke to more pounding Sunday morning. This time, it was the Morrisons, John, Esther, and 3 small children, all wrapped in blankets, lips blue. "Our cabin," Esther sobbed as Harold pulled them inside. "The window broke. Wind's coming in. We can't keep it above 20 degrees. The children—" "You stay here," Harold said firmly. "How long before that broken window freezes you solid?" "We were already all sleeping in one bed trying to share heat," John admitted, ashamed. At 2 in the afternoon, Robert and Linda Wheeler arrived with their 4 children. At 4, the Johnsons came, George and Mary was 9 months pregnant, her belly huge under layers of coats. By 7 that evening, 17 people were packed inside Harold's Quonset. He organized as best he could. Families with young children in the back bedrooms, single men in the living area. The stove burning constant, now fed by 6 men taking turns. The internal temperature dropped to 54 degrees with so many people opening the door. But 54 degrees was survival when outside was -47. Esther Morrison pulled Harold aside. "Harold, I was one of the people who laughed. At church, when Margaret—" She stopped, eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry." Harold shook his head. "Doesn't matter now." "It matters," she insisted. "You saved my children, and I made your wife ashamed of you." That night, Harold lay awake listening to 18 people breathing in the dark. Wind still howling outside, the metal structure vibrating slightly but holding firm. Flexible, not rigid. Bending, not breaking. He thought about Margaret, about the children, in Great Falls, safe but far away, and he realized he'd built the perfect shelter. But he'd destroyed his family doing it. They woke to screaming Monday morning, not the scream of fear or pain, but something primal, something beyond words. Mary Johnson was in labor, and the sound that came from her was the sound of every woman who'd ever brought life into a world that didn't care if it was convenient. "It can't be now," George whispered desperately, holding his wife's hand so tight his knuckles had gone white. "Not here, not during— oh God, Mary, not now." "Babies don't wait for storms," Esther Morrison said, her voice carrying that strange calm women get when they're needed, when crisis strips away everything except purpose. She was already moving to Mary's side, already assessing with hands and eyes, or convenience, or perfect timing. "Linda, I need hot water as much as you can boil. Harold, I need clean sheets, every single one you have, and I need towels." Harold had never felt so useless in his entire life. He'd built houses with his bare hands, raised barn frames that weighed tons, shaped raw lumber into homes that would stand for generations. But here was the most fundamental act of human existence happening 10 feet from him, and all he could do was boil water and stay out of the way. He filled every pot, every pan, set them on the Monarch stove. The women had taken over the back bedroom, hanging blankets for privacy, but there was nowhere for the men to go in 900 square feet. Nowhere for the children to go. Just 17 people trying to give space that didn't exist. The labor lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of Mary's cries echoing through the metal space, getting louder, more desperate, more raw. 6 hours of George pacing, praying, apologizing to his unconscious wife for ever touching her. 6 hours of children frightened by sounds they didn't understand, men uncomfortable, looking anywhere but toward the back room. Emma held Clara, both girls crying quietly. Thomas sat with the Wheeler boys, all of them silent and scared. Frank Hutchins and Robert Wheeler stood by the door, smoking cigarettes they'd been saving, blowing smoke into the blizzard through a cracked door. Harold made more coffee, boiled more water, fed the stove, checked the temperature. All the useless things men do when women are doing the real work. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Esther's voice cut through. "She's crowning. Mary, when I tell you to push, you push." George was on his knees now, face in his hands, shoulders shaking. And then, at 3:07 on Monday afternoon, January 17th, 1949, while the worst blizzard in Montana history raged outside and temperatures hit -47 degrees, a sharp cry pierced through the metal walls. "It's a girl!" Esther shouted, and she was laughing and crying at the same time, her voice breaking with emotion and exhaustion and the sheer miracle of it. "George! George! You have a daughter!" The sound that went through that Quonset wasn't cheering. It was something deeper, a collective exhale, a release of tension that had been building for hours, the sound of 17 people who'd just watched life defeat death in real time. George stumbled to the back room. Harold heard him sob, heard Mary's tired laugh, heard the wet sounds of a newborn cleaning her lungs. Esther emerged minutes later carrying a bundle wrapped in Harold's best blanket, and every person in that space moved closer to see. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, Esther announced, beaming like she'd done it herself. "Perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, mad as hell to be here." The baby was red, wrinkled, furious, waving tiny fists at the injustice of existence. And she was beautiful. Linda Wheeler was crying, Esther Morrison was crying, even Frank Hutchins had to wipe his eyes and blame it on smoke. And Harold, standing in the middle of his ridiculous metal tube that everyone had mocked, that had destroyed his marriage, that had made his children cry from shame, realized something. This wasn't just shelter, this was a cocoon, a chrysalis, a place where the impossible became possible. His house of metal had just become a birthplace, a beginning. The storm broke at dawn Tuesday. The wind stopped like someone flipped a switch. Strange, complete silence. They opened the door to a transformed world, 20-foot snowdrifts, trees snapped in half, and across the white prairie, damaged structures visible in every direction. Frank's barn, the one Harold had built so carefully, stood intact, but Frank's house had lost half its roof. The Morrison cabin had broken windows on 3 sides. The Wheelers had their door torn off its hinges. Every traditional structure in the area had damage. Cracked walls, collapsed roofs, foundations shifted by the force of wind, hammering directly against flat surfaces. The Quonset was perfect, not a single loose bolt. The curved surface had let the wind flow around, not against. Flexible, absorbing force instead of rigidly resisting. Robert Wheeler walked slowly around the structure, hand sliding over the corrugated metal. 5 days, he murmured. 60-mile-per-hour winds, -47 degrees, and it doesn't have a scratch. Frank Hutchins stood staring at his destroyed house, then at the intact Quonset. He laughed, a bitter but genuine sound. "I gave you this thing for $150. Thought I was cheating you." "You were," Harold said quietly. "Just not the way you thought." The families started returning to their damaged homes Wednesday. There was massive work ahead, windows to replace, roofs to repair, heat to restore. But before leaving, John Morrison pulled Harold aside. "How much would it cost," he asked hesitantly, "to build one of these, a Quonset?" Harold blinked in surprise. You want to live in one?" "I want to be alive next winter," John corrected. "My cabin nearly killed us. This structure kept 18 people alive and comfortable, kept a newborn baby warm. So yes, I want one." "A 20 by 48 complete kit costs about $40 new from the Strand Steel Company," Harold said slowly. "Plus 20 for foundation and end walls, plus 20 for insulation if you do it like I did. $80 total, plus labor." John nodded firmly. "Build me one. I'll sell my cabin to pay for it." By Friday, Harold had 5 orders. Harold was splitting firewood when the 1940 Ford pulled up in front of the Quonset Saturday. His heart jumped. Margaret got out first, moving slowly, cautiously. Then Emma, Thomas, and Clara running through the snow to him. "Daddy!" Clara shouted, jumping into his arms. "Are you okay? We heard on the radio about the storm." Harold held his daughter tight, looking over her head at Margaret. She stood by the car, staring at the Quonset like she was seeing it for the first time. "I heard," she said quietly when the children ran inside, "about the families you sheltered, about the baby, about—" She paused. "About how this absurd metal thing saved 23 lives." Harold said nothing, just waited. "I was wrong," Margaret continued, voice breaking. "Not about wanting a real house, not about the children being teased, but about you. You weren't choosing metal over family. You were—" She gestured helplessly. "You were building something stronger than I could see." "I still want to build you a wooden house," Harold said softly. 2 stories, a porch, everything you've always wanted." "I know." Margaret finally looked at him. "But now I understand that a home isn't about looking right. It's about keeping people safe. And this ridiculous metal tube, she laughed, the sound wet with tears, this ridiculous metal tube did that better than anything I'd imagined. They didn't embrace. Not yet. 12 years of marriage don't heal in a moment. But she walked inside with him, and that was a start. By spring, 7 families in Shelby were living in Quonset huts. Harold built one per month, charging only material cost plus $50 labor. Pastor Henriksen visited to apologize. I judged your choice, he admitted. Talked about providing properly, but you provided something no wooden house could. Life when death was at the door. Emma wasn't teased at school anymore. Now half her friends lived in Quonsets too. Margaret still wanted a wooden house eventually, but she stopped packing suitcases, stopped crying, started inviting neighbors for coffee in the metal hall, as she called it with affectionate irony. And on the last Friday in March, George and Mary Johnson knocked on the door holding their 2-month-old baby. We wanted you to officially meet her, Mary said, smiling. This is Hope Harriet Johnson, named for the man whose shelter brought her safely into the world. Harold held the tiny baby, feeling the feather-light weight, and realized it wasn't about proving he was right. It never was. It was about building something strong enough to hold life when the world tried to take it away. And sometimes strength doesn't come from looking right. It comes from bending instead of breaking. Harold finally built Margaret the wooden house she wanted in 1952. 2 stories, a porch, hardwood floors in every room. But they didn't tear down the Quonset. They converted it into Harold's carpentry workshop, where he drafted plans for the 53 Quonset structures he built over 3 years. And every time a storm came, every time the wind howled and temperatures dropped, families in Shelby slept peacefully inside corrugated steel tubes, not because they looked right, but because they kept them alive. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered.